Do you have a question about today's program? You can text it to us live. Text your question to 425 477 9950. That's 425 477 9950. Now, back to the show.
Hello, good morning. Welcome back to another virtual visit and our last virtual visit of this season, but we're not gone for good. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but as always, my name is Alex, and we're coming to you live from the floor of the Alaska SeaLife Center. We want to thank our sponsor for these programs. We've been able to bring you these free programs on Wednesdays this whole past year, thanks to Royal Caribbean Group. So we always want to thank them. And of course, being able to bring you to the SeaLife Center has been really, really fun this year. One of the things that we've done is kind of showed you a little glimpse at the weather every day. And so for our virtual visit, we go out there and we kind of record the sunrise. And this is today's sunrise. It's okay. It's pretty sunny today. It's actually been pretty dry here lately in Seward. And one of the things you can just barely make out all the way over on the right side of the screen here is we have had a landslide in Seward. It kind of made the news. You might have even heard about it. If you're not in Alaska, you might have heard about it even on national news. We just had a big landslide here. No one was injured in the landslide, but it has kind of cut off a chunk of the town to the south here. So there's currently some excavators out there working on that. You can just barely make out the slide on the far right of the screen. But something we decided to do, because this is today's sunrise. We have brought in the sunrise that we had back in December. So this is actually like our shortest sunrise of the year. Both of these sunrises were done at the exact same time of day, from 8:30 to about 10:30 in the morning. And so this one was for like December 20th or 19th. It was really close to winter solstice there. And you can see the weather was much different. And it was just significantly darker and cloudier. But let's take a look at this one versus the one we had today. We can even cut to it like halfway through, I think, just because boom, there you go. So that's our shortest sunrise clip of the year in December, and then this is probably one of our longer day sunrise clips. And of course, the sun's already up by these times with this. So that was pretty fun for our last episode of the season here. We wanted to show kind of the time frame that we've been doing these programs through. And speaking about the time frame, if you've been with us for a while, you've seen some of those early episodes. We are actually going to be dipping back into a topic that we touched on in some of those early videos. And while we're doing this, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to type those on up in the chat. Or you can text us at that number we run while we're live. Laura is monitoring the computer today, so they'll get us any questions that you might send in. And if you're watching and we're not live anymore, you can leave a comment on this video. We'll try to get to that. Or you can always email us questions at asktuffy@alaskasealife.org. That's asktuffy@alaskasealife.org. All right, so I mentioned that we were going to be talking about something we've talked about previously on our programs today, and that is wildlife response. So previously on this season, we looked at the release of 2 seals. We actually looked at the treatment and release of 2 little seals that came in through wildlife response last year. So wildlife response is our program here at the center where we can bring in injured, sick, orphaned, otherwise stranded marine animals in need. We'll bring them in, we'll treat them. So you can see like this one actually had to get in, get some stitches, get some surgery. They were looking at that. But we started the season, I think this was like maybe our 2nd or 3rd episode of virtual visits. We looked at the last patients that we had through the wildlife response program. And this is kind of the footage we get of most of our patients. We get treatment footage, and then you'll see here, we also get some release footage. Because of course, some of these animals can be released back out into the wild. I love this top-down shot, just having to rotate the animals around. You can see all the different things that are looked at. They're like taking pictures. Here they are removing some little sutures or stitches there. So this is the sort of thing we normally see of the wildlife response program here, is that we can go get them, but then we mostly see their treatment here, and in the case of these 2 seals, we see their release. But today we're going to be seeing a little bit different footage from this. We're actually going to be looking at some animals that showed up here, and since they were in town, they were very local, we were actually able to get their capture on footage. So this is pretty exciting because we're going to be taking a look at the capture of the capture of one animal. It's our first admitted marine mammal for the season. So we started this whole season of virtual visits with our last patients, our last admitted patients from last season, and now we're ending our season with the first admitted patients of this season. But down on the beach here in Seward, we have had some elephants show up. And when I say that, I mean elephant seals. So these are another marine mammal. We've just had them down on the shore here in Seward. And so we're going to take a look because there were two that showed up. There was a little boy that showed up. We don't know exactly how old he is, but based on the other one, maybe he was about a year old. We don't know. But he just kind of hauled up. Every once in a while in Seward, we do get these elephant seals. And the problem with elephant seals is they go through a really catastrophic molt. And instead of just shedding their fur, they will actually shed the first couple layers of their skin. I've got to imagine it doesn't feel good, but it also just makes them look terrible. Like we get calls whenever they haul in. People are like, oh, there's a dead seal or there's a seal dying. They don't look happy. And so when these animals show up, we of course send people out to watch them. And you saw, actually, I believe it was Savannah there, one of our wildlife response staff, just with binoculars from not that far away, but trying to get a good look. And here you can see, you know, they're out there discussing, hey, does this animal actually need our help or not? And that, of course, is something that we always tried to determine because these animals don't always need our help. And so ultimately it was decided this one, it was fine. It had some injuries, you can see there, but they were actually healing up. So they think this one was kind of just being a little lazy, a little mopey, maybe not feeling so good. This is the same elephant seal. It hauled up in a parking lot immediately behind the center at one point. And to me, it looks like, you know, when my cats have a hairball, and you can kind of tell that they're working on a hairball, they don't feel very good. They just sort of lay out. So, you know, it looked very concerning. We do get calls about these animals. But the important thing, if you ever see an animal you think is in need of care of somewhere like the SeaLife Center, if you're in Alaska, or your local marine response group or program, please call them. Don't just get in there and get these animals because sometimes they don't need care. This little male was fine. Now this one, this is the one we're going to talk about today. This was down by the small boat harbor. And so this is a female that showed up around the same time as the male. And again, just looking like a lump, honestly. Just kind of sitting there, not really doing a whole lot. Now the problem here is that she was in a heavily trafficked area. And this is something we've run into with animals before, where they haul up down by the boat harbor and a lot of people see them, which means we get a lot of calls. It also means that there could be a lot of people sort of disturbing this animal. So she was just down by the small boat harbor. Here you can see she kind of hauled up on the beach a little bit, not just on a boat ramp anymore. But she was looking kind of bloated, a little more lethargic than we were perhaps expecting. And she was in this heavily trafficked area. So unlike the male, we ultimately decided to step in with this little female elephant seal. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I fortunately had the opportunity to tag along on the capture, and you'll see the release of this animal. But when I did that, I had like a camera, and of course our media team was there too, so we were able to get all sorts of cool footage. And the very first thing, right, we do a lot of planning when it comes to these animals, because we have to show up at the beach, we've got to see where the animal is, and we just have to plan out kind of our route of attack a little bit. How are we going to get this animal? So we've got some footage there of the planning of capturing this animal. And it does take a lot of planning. And in particular, this animal wasn't entangled. Sometimes we get animals that are tangled up. They can't move very well. It wasn't particularly injured. You know, she did have some scrapes, some wounds maybe, but they weren't enough to make her not able to move. So there was an extra step of planning here. Also, she's quite large. We ended up weighing her. She's somewhere in 300 pounds range. So this is an animal that we had to really figure out how we were going to approach it. We had this kennel. We actually had some help from some local Coast Guard folk here. And we went over the whole process. We were like, all right, step one, we're going to have people come in from the sides. Step two, we're going to have people come in with this crate once we've secured the animal. And so we basically just went through step by step by step. How do we actually get this animal, and how are we going to make sure the animal doesn't get away? because that's kind of the thing. When it's not entangled, when it's not injured, there's a chance that it could just get away into the water, and then we're not going to be able to catch it. So here you can see we actually had to climb this kennel down some rocks there. It wasn't the best approach, but we ultimately got all the gear down there. Also, these herding boards are really important. This animal, elephant seals, are able to do something I heard our staff calling it like caterpillaring, where they'll sort of rise all the way up, and they can get surprisingly tall. So these herding boards are a good thing to keep between you and the animal, and you can see them sort of saying, well, we'll swoop around from the side here. And so there was a lot of planning involved in this capture. Now, when we ultimately decided to go in and capture the animal, like I mentioned, we had to keep it from getting into the water. Because if it gets in the water, we're not going to be able to capture it as easily, if at all. If it just swims away, we're out of luck. So we actually had to be a little sneaky with our capture. And you can see here in this footage of the capture, some of us hung back and some of them went forward. So the folks that had the herding boards went out in front. And the whole goal was to get herding boards. Those are the big red boards. They're used to herd animals. The whole goal was to get the herding boards in between in between the animal and the water. Also, you want to keep those boards in between you and the animal. But it was all about keeping it in between the animal and the water so that the animal couldn't just run into the water. And you can see it's a slow process getting out there. They're kind of tiptoeing, and when the seal raises its head up, they stop. And then they'll start tiptoeing again. And it wasn't just this one team. They actually worked together. We had a second team coming in from the other side. And that way, like, one team was able to draw the attention of the animal away, and the other team could make some progress. And then when the seal looked at them, the other team would come in. It was a little bit of like red light, green light going on here. And I think I actually slapped it. Yeah, we got a little bit of a sped up footage here because it was quite long. But you can see like one team moves, and they stop, and the other teams move in, and they'll stop, and then this team moves. And so it was quite a process, but they were able to basically inch their way forward. You can see the animal just on the right side there. We strapped the camera onto one of the folks at the herding board, and basically they just were slowly getting closer to this lump, and it lifts its head up, it's looking at the other team, and then when it puts its head down, they stop, because now it's looking at them. And it lifts its head back up, and they're going for it. And so eventually they get close enough, they just have to make the call, like, all right, this is where we're going to get the animal. And pretty quickly here, they just move on behind the animal and get that herding board directly up against the side of the animal so that it cannot move into the water. And with all of the herding boards that they had, they were able to basically form a little shield there. So you can see really quickly, they just jump on in there. Seal didn't seem terribly perturbed at this point in time, but for those of us that hung back with the kennel, when we saw that team move in with the herding boards, then the kennel came out, right? Because this is a big, clangy, very heavy metal kennel. So we didn't want to even try to bring this out until the animal was secured. And with that, we were able to move the kennel out, and you can see sort of how this works. We have a little shield wall there with the herding boards, and then we're just going to set up that kennel next to the animal and get started. So as I mentioned, this animal, about 300 pounds. It's kind of impressive being next to. It didn't really do much of a big caterpillar thing. It didn't get up too tall. But those herding boards are obviously to stop the animal from moving, but also to protect us. So you can see everyone had like gloves on. You really got to take precautions with these animals because, of course, they are wild animals. And we want them to stay wild animals if we can. So release is always something we try to push for. Some species and some patients can't be released. But I just want to stop for a moment before we get to the rest of this and see if we have any questions there. Laura's keeping an eye on those questions. So if you've got any, you can either text us at that number we run while we're live, or you can hit us in the chat. Looks like maybe
no questions.
No questions
but
yet.
Several thank yous about taking care of awesome animals.
All right, folks, thanking us about the wildlife response. And it's a weird one. The wildlife response, a lot of people hear that we do it, and they come to the SeaLife Center and they're like, where are the animals that you rescued? Where's the little sea otter that I heard about? Unfortunately, a lot of our animals in wildlife response are behind the scenes. We keep them kind of away from the public eye. And part of that is to, for any animal we can release, we want to keep them away from the public so that they're not like getting too used to humans. But they're sort of sheltered. And so the public doesn't get a lot of, view of the wildlife response. So that's why we're doing programs like this.
What determines
Ooh,
what is
question.
able to be released and not?
All right, a question about what determines if it's releasable or not. It can depend species to species, and even within a single species, things like age or condition can make an animal releasable or non-releasable. So two prime examples, like our two most common patients, harbor seals and sea otters. From the get-go, a very young harbor seal is considered a potentially releasable candidate. And that is because mom is really hands-off with these animals in the wild, so we can be really hands-off. We can keep our distance. We can make sure the animal doesn't just like see us coming in and giving it food, so that when we release that animal, hopefully it doesn't associate humans with food. But on the other hand, the sea otter, if it comes in really young, under about 6 to 8 months old, cannot be released because of how hands-on mom is with that animal. So we have to be hands-on. And so that little sea otter pup gets, bottle fed. We're in there toweling it off, making it get all dry. So because of the amount of care, the amount of interaction that we have with that animal, we're worried about that animal just getting used to humans. So that's one thing that can determine if they're non-releasable. But even within harbor seals, if you have a harbor seal that's too injured, and for example, we had a harbor seal came in that was blind, right? And so that condition, that wasn't necessarily an injury, but that condition, or if there is an injury that doesn't fully heal, that would prevent that animal from being able to survive in the wild, like being blind, that seal wouldn't be able to catch its food. That can make what was possibly a releasable candidate into a non-releasable candidate. So there's all sorts of considerations like that. Looks like maybe another question there.
Is the elephant seal that we're talking about today a female?
Yes, so the elephant seal that we captured was a female, and what was really kind of fun about this one is she had a tag on her flipper already. And so this was actually tied down to some research in California where they had tagged these animals down there, and as this animal's working its way up the coast, more into the northern Pacific, maybe out towards the Aleutians, she just happened to swing in here. But because she had that tag, and we had someone in the building who was like, oh, I can talk with this researcher, we were actually able to figure out she was probably about a year and some months old. So it was pretty fun to sort of already have a history on the animal. But yes, the one that we captured was a female. The one that we also saw on the beach that wasn't captured, that one was a male. Another question.
Is the red color of the boards and the clothing significant?
Oh, mostly just people can see them very visibly. So no, it's not like the red's going to draw the ire of the animal, like some sort of like bullfighting thing. No, it's mostly just it's very bright. It's easy to keep track of everything, easy to see the people. And when the public is watching, and you see these Alaska SeaLife Center shirts, the red kind of just indicates that's our wildlife response team. So it's just more uniform and bright colors. All right, so we're actually going to take a look at how it is we got that seal into the kennel. We saw them kind of sneak up on it, but now we have to get this 300-pound animal into the kennel, which opens on top. So we obviously weren't going to lift the animal in there. Instead, we were going to roll the kennel and basically just herd the animal in there. And we had to secure the head, right? This is a wild animal. You don't want them to like bite you. So we have a net. It just goes on their head to keep that head kind of down. And then we just sort of push together the kennel and that little shield wall. Now she was kind of long, so we had to help a bit. Her back flippers get into the kennel, so you can see one of our vets reaching in from the side there, and other folks reaching in to really kind of push that animal in. And meanwhile, this is my view. I was just wearing a camera. We were ready that as soon as they were like, yep, the seal is in there, it was our time to shine. We had to then roll that kennel back and get the lid on it before this animal freed itself fully from the net. And then you got this whole issue of how do we get this animal safely secured inside the kennel. So there you can see it's currently in the net. As we get this lid down, it even starts to roll itself over. You can see down at the bottom there, it's rolling around and getting out of that net. So we had to get the lid down and on to this animal gently, right? It's a heavy lid, so you got to be careful with it. And then that lid actually gets secured. We had some little like carabiners that clip on to the side. You can see me getting one right there. And it just gets clipped on. But now we have what's already a heavy kennel. I don't recall exactly how many pounds this kennel weighed, but it's solid metal. It's a hefty kennel. We have that plus a 300-pound animal in there. So we're moving like 400 pounds of material. So this just takes everyone lifting it. And we were not about to go back up the rocks that we had to get this kennel down in the first place. So we actually went a much flatter longer route, which meant, of course, we were carrying this kennel for even longer. But yeah, it's an errand getting an animal from the wild. Now this one really cooperated, right? There could be an animal that's much more active and much more scared, right? This is certainly a scary thing for the animal. It doesn't know why people are putting it in this kennel. We can't be like, oh, we're going to help you, right? So we can only try to make this process as quick, as efficient, and as little stress as possible for the animal. Ultimately, we ended up having to get this up a bit of a slope, though, which was, again, a bit of a chore, hauling this 400 pounds up the slope. Everyone really just taking small steps. It took us quite a while to get back up there. But at the top, because this was in town, we were able to just drive the wildlife response van right on over to the beach. So actually up at the top, we're able to load this kennel into the wildlife response van, which we do have some shots of it in here. But if you're more interested in kind of seeing the inside of the van, we've got some clips of the inside in our first wildlife response programs of the season, which I encourage you to check out if you haven't seen those, because it goes more into the treatment of these animals while they're here. You can see we sort of had to step right up the last few bits there, and then we just cut to sliding it into the van. So we were able to get that animal into the van, and then we were only about 5 minutes away from the SeaLife Center at this point. This was a very easy response to make. Any other questions while we're at a good pause here, and then we'll talk a little bit about the animal at the center.
Yes.
All right, more questions.
Do seals see in color?
Oh my gosh, I am actually unsure of that. Do you know? Laura is also a little unsure. I don't know how well seals see in color. They do see very well. They are very visual. They've got huge eyes. Those eyes can see very well in the dark as well, but I'm not sure how much color they're going for, actually. That's a great question. If we find out the answer, we'll type that down in the comments on this video, so stay tuned for that. That's a good question.
Is Bryce the seal still here or somewhere else? Bryce was before my turn.
Bryce was the blind one. Someone knew about Bryce. So Bryce the blind seal, yeah, he is not here. We actually found another facility that I believe already had a blind or visually impaired seal. I think they already had one, and that's why that facility was selected. But no, Bryce did not stay with us. He was transferred to another facility. So we'll cut back over to kind of this whole process of collecting this animal, because of course the job is not done. We had to get this animal back to the SeaLife Center, and once we arrived at the SeaLife Center, basically getting it out of the van was another lifting chore. But we had to move this animal to a back holding area. And again, this is out of the public's eye usually. So this back holding area is able to be separated from the water. So she had some water back there she could get in. But when we first put her in there, we didn't want her in the water. We wanted to get really good eyes on her. We wanted to see if there were any injuries. We wanted to kind of judge her general condition. They also went in and got some blood samples from her. So you can see there's another gate over to the left-hand side here. That gate leads to her water. So once they were comfortable with her being in there and comfortable with her having access to the water, they were able to open that gate up. And you can see she's very cute. And she made, I don't know, I feel like we describe a lot of the noises that our animals make as kind of weird goats, but she sort of had a weird goat sound. And just looking very pathetic. But they actually ended up running that blood work, and she was all right. So we think perhaps that bloating that we saw and the sores that she had could be related to that molting that I talked about. You can see a little bit of blood. She's got some sores and cuts and scrapes. So some of that could be related to the molting. Some of it could just be related to, she's crawling up on these rocks and everything else. But the good news is that her blood work actually came back great. And we were able to release her pretty soon after. So we can actually show the release footage. I've got some here of basically getting her back out in the wild. And we only had her, I think, like 2 days. And so it actually snowed in between us collecting her and releasing her. So we got some really pretty snow. But once again, a whole team of people whose sole job is just loading this animal back into the van. And usually we release these animals back to where they're found. And in this case, we were able to release her back into Resurrection Bay, but we didn't want to release her back exactly back to where we found her because she was found down at the small boat harbor. That's where we got her, and we didn't want her there, right? That's a heavily trafficked area. So instead of going back up north to the small boat harbor, we drove south. This is the road that's currently cut off by that landslide. We drove south on down to a beach here and released her a bit closer out to the open water of the Gulf of Alaska. I mean, she's still quite a ways away from it, but just to a less trafficked area. And the snow made things a little bit treacherous getting out there, but we were able to offload her. And then you just kind of walk the kennel down to the beach. With the snow, we weren't able to drive all the way down to the beach. But it's just a matter of opening that kennel up. And we do let the public know about these releases. So sometimes folks show up, get those herding boards, just in case she like takes a wild swerve and tries to make it back to land, or back into like the woods or whatever. We can kind of make sure that she knows, oh yeah, the water's over that way. Sorry, we just had a radio call for a group in the building. But yeah, there she goes off in the water. She was very, very grumpy about the whole thing. But once she was in the water, I think she was like, oh yeah, no, this is good. This is much better. And she actually hung out there a little while. We saw her, and then we headed back to the SeaLife Center. And that was the first patient of our wildlife response season this year. And this is the last episode of virtual visits for this season. We, have kind of been following the school year with this. But tune on in the fall, and we'll be picking these seasons back up, and maybe we'll have some more exciting stories from this season of our wildlife response program. But also through the summer, keep an eye on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page, and we're going to be hopefully getting some video content up there for you, even if it's not these longer form videos. We want to make sure that you know what's going on at the SeaLife Center. So before we kind of wrap up, we'll do a last call for questions, and it looks like we might already have a couple queued up.
Are you tracking her since you released her?
That's a great question. Are we tracking the seal since we've released her? Not this particular animal. Sometimes we do put little tags on them that track them, little satellite tags, so we can see where they are. We weren't terribly concerned about where she was going to be going or anything like that. She, like we said, her blood work came out all right. We just think they kind of tucked into this bay on their way out to where we expect them to be, more in the actual Pacific, out in the Gulf. So we didn't tag her or anything. She actually already had that tag, which was great. But we didn't put a tracking tag on her. Excuse me. All right. No other questions at this time. So I'll start wrapping us up. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to these virtual visits this season. It's been really fun, and it's been exciting to be able to bring you to the SeaLife Center virtually and for free. And for that, we need to thank our sponsors. So this season of virtual visits has been made free thanks to a contribution from Royal Caribbean Group. They made it possible for us to just put these up online, not charging anything for them, and that's really exciting to us because, of course, Alaska, it's a really far destination for a lot of folks. You might want to know what we're doing up here, but maybe you can't travel. Obviously, traveling's a little tough right now as is, but we want to be sure that you can still visit us, even if it's virtually. And so I want to thank you again for tuning in for these virtual visits. Just a reminder that there won't be one live next week, but we will see you again later in the year for another season of our virtual visits. Until then, take care.